Hey, Satanico here once again for Godlovescomics, and I'm back with another unboxing video. I've just got one pretty big package that doesn't even have comics in it per se. It's more books about comics, but that should be interesting. Let's see how easily it is to crack open. Very easy. It comes in this, he's actually bagged it in Franklin Craft bag. That's fine. So I've spent the week, literally an entire week, constantly watching this hurricane that was barreling towards the coastline, and it is not fun. It is not fun, and this seems now to be every single year that I am contemplating what comics to take with me when we evacuate, because you know, I've been hit by a hurricane once before and had some stuff destroyed. Fair amount of stuff. I didn't really remember losing very many comics other than Origins of Marvel Comics, one of those Fireside books, was severely water damaged, but there's always that chance. In fact, it's a very distinct chance. So leads me to always have to contemplate. Fortunately, I have a very small collection, but contemplate what is of any value that I must take with me, and would be heartbroken if I lost. Some stuff is just sentimental value or hard to replace, sort of indie zines and things, and then some stuff is actual monetary value and artistic value as well. So okay, so this package was really easy to get into. And the first item is one that I've wanted for quite a long time and just have never gotten around to getting it. Sometimes because it's been very hard to find and often pretty expensive. I've actually forgotten what I paid for these. Except for, well, I know what I paid for, I think, two of them. I forgot what I paid for this, but it was probably around, may have been under $20. It's about a $40, $50 book. Well, $30. So this is Paul Pope. For those who are not familiar, Paul Pope is, of course, he's sort of emerged in the mainstream now for quite a while as a very in-demand variant artist, variant covers artist, and of course famously did Batman Year 100. He's done a little bit of Spider-Man and stuff like that, but mostly he's done his own sort of indie stuff, particularly his own indie stuff that was self-published beforehand with THB and BuzzBuzz, and then he subsequently sort of came into the mainstream a little bit with doing some Vertigo stuff like 100% and Heavy Liquid, all of which is always filled with beautiful artwork, not always the best storytelling, sometimes good stories, sometimes good, interesting characterization or dialogue, but often uneven. He's been sometimes criticized for not being the best writer in contrast to his powerhouse art. But, you know, Pope, to my eyes, is kind of unique among modern artists because he actually captures some of the visceral power. Let's look at the book while I yammer. Some of the visceral power of Jack Kirby, even though you won't see it there. This is more of his sort of European style stuff, and he also incorporates a lot of European and Japanese style, and this lighter line, I would say, is more along the European and Japanese. I mean, it could be either one, because Europe has such a huge diversity of style, and in fact Japan does as well. But his heavier lines, his heavier brushstrokes, his really powerful stuff sometimes has a lot of the visceral impact of Jack Kirby without actually ever looking like a Jack Kirby copycat. But he has done homages to Kirby, particularly with his OMAC and the Commandy Challenge. And he also did an Adam Strange story, which of course isn't Kirby, for the Wednesdays comics, the giant format. But the artwork in here is absolutely beautiful. And the only thing that I've heard negative about this book, I mean, Amazon reviews, everybody loves the content, the beautiful art. But the only thing I've heard that was negative is that the binding is pretty cheap, and so I guess with a lot of views, and if you crack it open too hard, sometimes the pages will come loose. So here's some little bit almost kinky or suggestive stuff. But this book was put out by Chris Pitzer of Ad House Books, and I used to run into Chris quite a lot at places like the Small Press Expo and then even Heroes Con. Back when I used to go to those things, I would still love to go once again, but haven't really had the finances, the wherewithal, or any kind of material. Oops, I better not get banned here. But Chris actually put this out after I had done a pretty lengthy interview with Paul Pope at a time when Pope, I think he had mostly done THB, and maybe he had just emerged with Heavy Liquid for Vertigo. I've already forgotten now. I'm pretty sure he did the Vertigo stuff. And so, I mean, it's not like he was an underground artist that nobody would have discovered, but I know that Ad House kind of picked up on him after that and put out this book, which I'm sure was a pretty good seller for them. And it's been out there for a long time. I forget when this book was published, but the interview I did was back in 2001, and this probably came out a few years after that, in 2003, 2004. It's hard to believe it's that old, but at the same time, oh no, it's not that old. It's 2007. But and actually, well, yeah, I think that's right. And in fact, even says proofreading by Lisa Pitzer, which is perhaps Chris's wife. Unless it's his sister, I don't know. But anyway, this is absolutely chock full of exquisite art. I've got quite a significant collection of Paul Pope stuff. Well, I say significant, I mean it's a small collection, but it's a pretty diverse collection. But I still see a lot of artwork that I've either only ever seen online or have not seen at all. So I'm pretty excited to really look through this and enjoy the artwork, because it is a feast for the eyes. I think that it's pretty unlikely that someone doesn't like at least some of Paul Pope's style and doesn't find something that they would like. I could understand, though, however, that people would not like, mainstream fans would not like his, not all mainstream fans would like his take on Batman in the Year 100 book, where he has Batman wear like false like vampire teeth, and it's just a very feral, bizarre sort of take on Batman, which is kind of what Pope does, and it's, I think, a really cool, visually powerful version, but I can understand where some fans wouldn't like this. This is a great illustration of the White Stripes. I've seen this one before. Jack White and Meg White, who apparently doesn't talk very much, even to Jack. And then there's Pope is kind of a rock star among comics artists and cartoonists. So, you know, there's some photos of him and his process. And tons of other beautiful stuff, and that's a little bit different style for him. And this apparently was done for Diesel. He's had some contracts and some runs with some fashion companies as well, because he draws, of course, beautiful clothing and beautiful girls, and you know, is a genuinely cool guy who kind of understands fashion, so that's usually helpful. Tons of cool stuff. Love it. There's some Jack Kirby stuff right there, where it just flat out says Jack Kirby, and that looks like a self-portrait of. Well, actually, that could almost be Han Solo, but I think that's a self-portrait of Paul. But of course, Paul usually, like a lot of artists have done this, inserts himself into most of his comics, where the protagonist often looks very much like Paul Pope. But that's perfectly fine, because he kind of has a suitable look for that kind of thing. So anyway, that is, I think it's just called Paul Pope, Pulphope, something that he usually goes by. But either way, great book. I'm very excited with it. I'm very happy with it. It looks like it's filled with good stuff. And speaking of another influence on Pope is Alex Toth. And Alex Toth is someone who was just absolutely brilliant in his use of contrast and black spot color. Although Gil Kane, kind of famously, I read an interview with Gil Kane, reread it after a long time in the Comics Journal. Relatively recently, I've mentioned it a few times in the past, but Gil Kane kind of famously said that Toth was very, very good, but he was definitely not a genius, so it's just kind of funny. I love Gil Kane. I grew up with a lot more Gil Kane than I did Alex Toth. I'm just kind of discovering Alex Toth. I mean, I've always known about him. He's been talked about so much. If you read any kind of comics criticism or if you just know anything about the history of the art form. But his heyday was really before I was around to see most of this stuff. So I've only started to come to a lot of it later. And he definitely was an influence on Pope as well. And while Gil Kane may not think he was a genius, it's easy to imagine or easy to see a blank white page and then see the compositions that Toth puts on the page and recognize him as a compositional genius. You may not see it here. I think this is some of his early work, obviously. Volume 1 of Edge of Genius is actually what this is called, Alex Toth, Edge of Genius. So, and in fact, Gil Kane may have been responding directly to, titles like that. But, that's a beautiful drawing there. But particularly some of his stuff he did for EC, and then I was also just looking at some of Romance, some original art on Heritage that he did for some Romance comics, and absolutely beautiful. Including some interesting stuff where it's about a girl who's dating a blind guy, and just based on the black glasses and the way he's drawn, I mean, it looks quite a lot like Daredevil, if Alex Toth were to have ever drawn Daredevil. But beautiful stuff, even in the Romance comics, and then you see some of this stuff is also really beautiful, and that's a classic kind of case of his use of black spots, the silhouettes marching across the marsh in the middle of the war. This may be the Korean War, but I'm not positive. Doesn't look like World War II, and it's probably drawn well before Vietnam. And then these are, see a little bit of a chunkier, heavier lines here. But again, a feast for the eyes. I'm really looking forward to at least just looking through this. I don't know how much of it I will actually read in terms of the stories, but I definitely want to look at the artwork. There's a little bit, I wouldn't say he's influenced or they influenced Hugo Pratt. Maybe he did, or maybe, it worked both ways. But I mean, I wouldn't say their styles are particularly similar, but I would say that they both use heavy blacks and contrasts really beautifully. And this is a page that I actually did see as well on the original, Heritage in terms of original art, which I think is from one of the Romance comics, but it's not one of the ones I saw earlier tonight. But Gil Kane made an interesting point that when Jack Kirby came around and kind of came back into his own as a superhero artist in the 60s, famously with Stan, Jack, and the Marvel age, that pretty much pushed Toth not really out of the industry, but really kind of marginalized Toth's style in a way, because Toth just couldn't compete with Kirby in terms of that kind of big action. That's just not what Toth's strengths were. And I've seen Toth drawing Batman and doing some stuff. And he famously did cover for Batman Black and White. He's done some sketches and some things like that. And he's probably done some superhero stuff. But he just wasn't cut out for that kind of huge histrionic sort of over the top action, which Kirby seems to have been born to do. Of course, Kirby was a force of nature that no one really can match, but I guess Gil Kane's point was that not so much that Kirby was vastly superior to Toth, but just that the shift in terms of genre away from the sort of crime suspense and romance and thriller and noirish stuff and even war and westerns to predominantly superheroes just was not a good fit for Alex Toth. And I think that's actually very accurate. But really beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful book. Happy I got this, and I think I got this for $9. Joe Yank, Bacon and Bullets, $9.99, I think, something like that. And then, last but not least, is this tiny little book, Paul Auster's City of Glass, adaptation by Paul Karasek, a pretty well-renowned writer, and David Mazzucchelli, who is a very well-known cartoonist. You probably know David Mazzucchelli best for his work on Daredevil with Frank Miller when Frank Miller was writing it and Mazzucchelli was drawing it, and then subsequently Batman Year One, which remains a very, very popular work. And then subsequent to that was his return sort of to, I think he also did Rubber Blanket, which was one of his very indie sort of works before he ever did anything for the mainstream publishers. But then he kind of returned to, his indie roots with Asterios Polyp, which artistically, first of all, if you're looking for a remake of Daredevil or something you're not going to find, or Batman Year One, Asterios Polyp, sort of Ben Couture, Harvey Kurtzman artistic style, but also with very innovative and complex storytelling where you can absolutely see that Mazzucchelli is fighting to expand the art form, beyond just the sort of typical way of telling a story. And I read it and really liked it, and even did a review for it that ultimately had a bit of a dispute with the editor, so didn't see the light of day, but I at least got a free book out of it. I have not read Paul Auster's City of Glass, or really anything by Paul Auster, even though I'm pretty sure I've read some interviews with him and something like the Paris Review. But I remember this book being talked about a lot by the Comics Journal, praised quite a lot, and advertised quite a lot in the Comics Journal. So back when it was first released, so I was always aware of it. And looking inside, of which I haven't seen the contents of this book very much. I've seen a fair number of reviews many, many years back. I forget when this book was put out, but it was probably around, wow. Okay, the novel itself came out in 1985. I was going to say that this actual adaptation probably came out in around 2000, and in fact it did come out in 2004. And there's some preliminary about how they went about it. I enlisted David Mazzucchelli, whose art on Frank Miller's Batman Year One had shown a grace, economy, and understanding of the form that made the superhero genre almost interesting. A little jab at superheroes. The astonishing avant-garde comics and graphics he then went on to self-publish after abandoning the mainstream at the height of his acclaim made him seem ideally suited to the challenge of grappling with our proposed adaptation. But after a number of attempts, David began to look disheartened. He was more than able to tell the story in Paul's novel, but couldn't quite locate the inner rhythms and real mysteries that made the story worth telling. Maybe it was impossible. So I guess it wasn't impossible, and ultimately David Mazzucchelli agreed to do it. And actually looking at these panels, and this actually reminds me quite a bit of the storytelling they use, similar techniques. Not to say that these are in any way exact to anything that's in Asterios Polyp, but sort of avant-garde and a lot of symbolism and transitions like this tree to the lungs, and a lot of really interesting storytelling techniques. And David Mazzucchelli, as I said, abandoned the mainstream, but I think he teaches cartooning either at the School of the Visual Arts. I don't think he teaches at Kubert School, because I think he's just too divested from mainstream comics, although he certainly could teach there. But I think he does teach at New York's SVA, School of Visual Arts, which puts out a lot of cartoonists and a lot of famous comics artists as well. But this actually looks excellent, and I may actually do more than just skim the art and actually read this book, because it certainly looks worth reading. So, and this, by the way, well, okay, it does have a little, sticker that's on the back, which is a little frustrating. I actually remember now that the eBay listing said that it was in excellent condition, but it had a sticker that had been removed on the back, but it said the sticker was not sticky, which I was like, well, that's a nice detail to add, because you don't want that to be sticky, but right where my thumb is, it is in fact sticky, but that's okay. This was a $16 book initially, and so I picked it up for $3. It was $2.99, so certainly worth that. And that's pretty much it. 3 fantastic artists in 3 books. You've got Alex Toth, a legend who passed away relatively recently, unfortunately, but his work will live on indefinitely. He's maybe not as famous among a lot of mainstream comics fans, certainly, as Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko, because he never really worked on one of those iconic characters or an iconic sort of run on any particular comic that endures in the way, in terms of its fame. But absolutely legendary cartoonist who has influenced so many other cartoonists, so many cartoonists and artists that you see today. Some of the best talents, and some of them, Tim Sale or whoever, would probably cite Alex Toth as an influence at some point. And also did a lot of animation work as well, for stuff like, I think, Space Ghost, Herculoids, Johnny Quest being among my favorite, I think. And then Paul Auster, you've got David Mazzucchelli, another great artist, still very much alive, and Paul Pope, a thriving artist and just a powerhouse in itself. So 3 great artists, and that's pretty much it for that unboxing. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks very much. If you would like to leave a comment, that would be delightful, because no one's leaving comments these days. Thanks. Bye.